o'clock, but my understanding, and now I'm not getting my program. Where's the program? Okay. Where we were is that we were supposed to do the provisional terms of reference of the IRTC, and we have just gone through the criteria for selecting commissioners, and I think at least we've got that done. And the process for recommending 5 commissioners, I was told that that has been agreed and people are going to read, and if they've got any comments, then they're going to let me know. Visi Max?
Well, that's what you asked us to review, didn't you?
Yeah.
And then to come back and...
Yeah, just very quickly before we go to the terms of reference.
Yeah.
If there's anything that is amiss or
Look,
something
I hope that it was straightforward, but as we got rereading it and thinking it, I think we've created something which we may not have intended. So the way it currently reads is that the steering committee members, as I understand it, the steering committee members are going to submit names of potential commissioners, and they're going to collect those names from their constituencies, and that they're going to select a maximum of 5, which they submit. But it's not clear actually why we want the names to come all through the steering committee representatives. In other words, why other people shouldn't be free to make nominations.
Yeah.
And the risk is that the steering committee members, if they're presented with 50 names from their constituents, but can only submit 5, and have to leave out the 45, how are they going to make that choice? The 2 people who are here at the steering committee, and will there be necessarily trust, confidence from the broader constituency that they have made a fair choice? Well, that it's reflected the range. So I'm thinking that we should encourage the steering committee members to submit 5, up to 5 each, not to change that, but that it should also be open to anyone to submit, and that would go directly to the Secretariat. So that's one amendment. The second would be, we're not probably clear about the next step in that process. If we end up with 50 or 100 names, I think we should clarify about where that we're not individually approaching potential commissioners to find out about their availability at this early nomination stage, because I would worry that many potential commissioners will be approached by multiple people who will all want to nominate or think of the same name. But also I would worry that if a particular commissioner is approached by just someone in the university, relatively unknown, a student who wants, or a staff member who wants to nominate someone, that it won't have the same weight for that person. Whereas if the request comes from the chair of the steering committee or someone who's designated on behalf of the steering committee to approach that person to say, would you be available, explains what the requirements are, can maybe enter into a bit of negotiation about payment if that's necessary. Those issues of availability, therefore, would only be determined at a later stage, and we would need to make that explicit in describing the process. And so then, at what point do we test the availability? Do we test the availability when we've got a list of 30 maybe? Or do we test it when we've got the list of 5 or 10, maybe a short list of 10? I would probably suggest the latter. And that would probably be after the steering committee. Well, I'm not sure. We need some advice about that. But does the steering committee start convening and considering the nominations before they know about the availability of the people? Or do we establish the availability before the steering committee considers? It's probably as I'm saying it, I think probably the latter, because for the steering committee to consider a long list, many of whom would not be available, would be a waste. So we probably do need to establish the availability. So that means that there needs to be maybe a subgroup, a subcommittee that does an initial screening or shortlisting, so that we can get a large number down to a smaller number. But what became clear as I was reading it again is that there's some details we haven't thought through, and we don't want to get stuck on that later on.
I understood, though, before we stopped this process, that there was an indication that this was
It was decided.
already agreed.
And that's what,
So-
I mean, my understanding was that we had discussed this. It wasn't a long discussion, but there was the agreement if all the twos are elected, chosen by their constituencies, that to avoid being flooded by a whole lot of
I
things.
can't hear you, Debbie.
Sorry. So I am pretty sure, unless I was dreaming it, that we actually had a discussion on this. It wasn't a long discussion, amazingly, and we came to a decision that it would be that the two representatives would collect things. So we don't land up with 1,000 nominations. We land up with 5 maximum from each of the different constituencies. Those then get compiled by the Secretariat. One would expect there to be some overlaps, but whether there are or not, they then put those all into a list, and we then are asked to indicate what I said earlier about which of these people do you really want strongly, which of them can you live with, and which of them can you not live with. And then one sees what comes out of that process, and that is what is then discussed within the steering committee. I'm not sure, you certainly don't approach everybody right at the beginning, but if people want to nominate, sure, they can say to, I'm thinking of nominating you. Is it silly to nominate you because you won't be available? I don't think you can stop that. But they wouldn't be officially approached until it had got to a short list. But I'm just worried that I thought we had discussed this and agreed on it, and we now going back.
We can stay, if everyone is happy with that, we can stay with that. I suppose there are enough avenues for people to nominate, but
I think I almost want to understand, Visimax, what exactly you're worried about, what is not reflected, because the process that is being described for me, I understand as the constituency will nominate 5 and it will go into a secretariat who would then use the criteria in order to determine who are the people, and then that would be, the approach would be, those who are approached would be in the last, not everybody. I don't know.
I think I agree that was the decision. There's just one thing for me that is a bit of a concern, and that is the process that each constituency decides on for those 5 nominations. And so whether we should say, that maybe that should just be part of the conversation coming into the steering committee, to say this is how we came up with the 5. So for example, if there is a constituency and there's 20 nominations, how did you come up with a 5, so that there's also kind of a transparency around it?
I think I'm happy to withdraw my concern. I think that we may be making a problem where there isn't one.
Each constituency decides on its own how to do it.
Yeah, and presumably the constituencies are not sort of watertight, so you can submit to, because they overlap to some extent. So an ordinary academic, for example, doesn't belongs to which constituency here? Sorry?
Either the AU or Senate, depending on
Or
what
might be Black Academic Caucus as well, or might be an alumnus as well.
That's what I'm saying. So they're overlapping constituencies, but they may not belong to any actually. If they're not a member of the AU and they're not on Senate, and they're not on the BSc, then I was worried that there wasn't a mechanism for them to submit. But if we're saying that these constituencies aren't watertight, so even if you can submit to an academic head of department if you're an academic, because they don't just represent the HODs, then I can see a way of capturing, of enabling everyone to explain.
Kwezi, you're not. Are you fine? Okay.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Max has just said at the end there, that the HOD reps will not just be representing the HODs, but are representing the academics on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't part of formulating these constituencies, but I thought they were thought of in such a way that they could be overreaching. It's not just, yeah. As long as I think you find a way of communicating this information in such a way that everybody knows it's happening. And I think that covers everybody in terms of they know it's in process and they can nominate through whichever body. They can nominate via the student body, via the union, via the HOD, the dean structure, because people would feel easier with whatever structure is closer to them, or they feel my nomination can go here.
Okay.
Can they not nominate directly to the steering committee if they don't feel there's any other?
Yeah.
How do we deal
I think
with
that's a good question. If people can just send through nominations, because yeah.
I think we have representatives because we're actually trying to represent groups and constituencies.
Yeah.
So I'm actually finding it strange that we're now talking about
Yeah.
people that can directly to the steering committee, because we've just gone through the process. And everybody saw the alumni, we had so much submissions, and we took the time, even though we actually volunteer, if I may say so. Other people are staff members, so they can also do some of this in their staff time, to collate and try and work through different thoughts, contributions that is fair and equitable to everybody who submitted. So I'm not sure why we're concerned about individuals. I think there's enough spaces for people to be submitting to. We've got reps. Unless there's particular constituency, something I don't know about, where people have said their reps have not spoken to them and therefore that's a problem, then we should look at that. But I think otherwise, we're busy questioning a system that we've just used, and I thought the system worked. So I'm confused by that.
Chair, I don't think it's appropriate for the Secretariat to shortlist from all the candidates that are submitted or nominations that come in. So it seems at this stage that if, assuming there are 15 or 20 constituents and there are 5 nominees, I know there will be an overlap, we're speaking about a significant number of people potentially. So then, before we get to the steering committee, how would the steering committee arrive at that 5 that's going to be nominated or recommended to council? And I'm just raising this because it's a time issue. I'm working under quite tight time constraints. So it may not be a discussion for now, but it's not clear.
Okay.
It seems as if there's somebody who wants to answer.
What I thought we had agreed is that everybody would submit to the Secretariat. The Secretariat will do a purely secretarial job. They will compile it all. If one person is nominated by more than one constituency, their name would appear only once, but saying that they were nominated more than once. And then either electronically or in some way we'd have this voting that I'm now explaining for the 3rd time, but that every constituency would say for each of the 100, up to 100 people on the list, but hopefully fewer because there would be overlaps. Yes, we really like that person or would like them to be a commissioner. Yes, we can live with that person if everybody else really likes them. We're not going to veto it. And no, we really hate that person. We would feel very upset if that person was there. The Secretariat could then compile that, so we would hopefully have some people who everybody could live with or either liked very much, and that in a sense is a shortlist. And then we would have to, as a committee, choose from that. But the Secretariat would not be making any choices. They would just be compiling. And
Okay.
I've not seen this work done myself, but the system has been used before successfully at UCT.
Are there any, I mean, I think that I'm aware also that there are dates here that are completely out of sync in terms of, and I'm not sure, I don't think we can utilize this time to look at the dates. Perhaps we can come back to that at the end and now go into the terms of reference. Because I think that's an important discussion. Can I also say that we're now at 2 o'clock and we intend finishing off at 3. I realize that we've left this conversation for only an hour and we've used all our time with the previous conversation, which I think was very useful. So we're going to try to do the best we can. I did go through there and listened to the live stream in order to understand the meeting before and how we came to be here. And one of the things that came out for me was that there was a request from the students that they didn't have an opportunity to input into the process. And so the part of the reason to have created the space was for the student body to be able to say or to bring something to the meeting. I don't know whether it was supposed to be sent before or was it going to be delivered at this meeting. I think I just want to close that loop, because without talking about that before we go into the terms of reference as if there wasn't a break, or any other body for that matter that felt that they needed to go back, consult, get some ideas and bring back. So maybe the question I'm asking at this point in time is, are there any offers or something that comes from whoever felt that they needed to go and consult in order to be able to engage going forward, before we just take this as we're starting from where we stopped?
Yeah. So, we had to consult with students abroad, our broad constituency, and one of the main concerns raised was that the work of the IRTC, or the steering committee, overshadows some of the work that has been done and is being currently done by other students involved in other committees. So, for example, the mental health committee or the disco harassment section review task team, right? They're doing similar work, which is at the heart of why the IRTC is there. In other words, the work speaks to some of the issues of institutional culture, whatever, and all of that. But they don't get the kind of the issues unprioritized. So you don't have a sitting like this, live stream sessions discussing how DISCO has failed to deal with issues of sexual harassment at UCT, or you don't have the child council sitting on their task team. And when they then make recommendations, their recommendations are it sits on someone's desk and gets swallowed into the ordinary bureaucracy of the university. So that was the main concern that we got from students, was that we've been doing the work, I've been doing, so another example would be the curriculum change working group. It's been involved in similar work around decolonizing the university and decolonizing the curriculum, but it's not given as much weighting and isn't given the kind of importance or the urgency that this particular committee is given. So how then that relates to the terms of reference? One, there was an understanding that the initial terms of reference are fine. So broadly speaking, everyone is happy with but with the initial terms, so not the amendment, but with the initial terms of reference. So the proposal was then to say that all of these concerns must be fed into, not as an annexure, but as an addition to, so somehow those concerns must be fed into the work of the steering committee. How that, what that means practically, for example, is if the mental health committee comes up with recommendations, those recommendations don't just get swallowed into ordinary bureaucracies of the university. Rather, they must be treated in the same way that the recommendations which are going to be coming out from this steering committee, which are going to be made by commissioners, that those recommendations are given the same importance and the same urgency. So, for instance, if the commissioners from the IRTC make a particular recommendation, council would need to provide a very good reasons why those recommendations cannot be implemented in the university. And the request is, if the curriculum change working group or the physical harassment steering committee or the mental health steering committee makes recommendations, those recommendations must also be implemented and must also be given the equal weighting and the equal importance, because they are in fact the work of the, or at least they fundamentally ground why the IRTC is there, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So in a way, it answers the question as to, in between that meeting and this meeting, that's the discussions that the students have had around the incorporation of the work that is being done by the other committees into, or to have it as weighted as much as the recommendations of this committee are weighted with regards to how council decides on what has to be actioned. Is that the point? Okay.
Just quick, like the significance of this, for example, speaks to an issue that I raised in that I'm finding that people don't want to participate in, like, people, a large deal of my constituency that I come from doesn't want to participate in the IRTC, right? Because they feel like they're being ignored in their other task teams that have been set up. And I think what Simon is saying, what is being proposed, will probably also help in that people would probably be more open to also be engaging in this particular process as well, because it's not like, I don't know, if you understand what I'm trying to say, in that we had an issue of participation, and that was largely because a lot of people were very upset at how much attention and how much resources and how much effort is going into particularly this kind of team and this committee, whereas you have your sexual response team, you have your mental health task team, you have your curriculum change, all these other teams that have been set up, but they're not getting half as much effort, half as much resource as this. Which was taking away kind of from this IRTC. So nobody was responding to emails about terms of reference. People didn't want to participate just because it was very upsetting to see. And I think by including them, that's also going to help in our participation with this particular process, because it doesn't seem as if we're now competing between the two. It becomes almost one process, and we all get to participate. And the recommendations made by those particular teams who have specialists in those particular fields as well could feed into this process.
Okay. I think that's a suggestion, and I think for me it was, if you say then, Simon, that the initial terms of reference are deemed to be okay, can we just go back, or am I making a...
No, go on. I'll
Okay.
speak after you.
Can we just go back, because I did ask for what came into the initial, in the agreement. This was what was said about the terms of reference for the commissioners. And I'm not sure. I just want to go back to that and see whether there's anything that, over and above what the students are recommending, that the other committees that are outside of the structure should be given an opportunity to factor their discussion.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify point 2, because it's actually inaccurate in terms of further developments, right? That's going to be picked up, I imagine. 2, the submissions on amnesties granted, because amnesties were actually not granted in the end. And unfortunately, the agreement was not updated.
That's an error, sorry.
Yeah. So it should be advice submissions from all constituencies on the clemencies that were granted, and make recommendations as to whether the clemencies should be become amnesty.
Okay.
And invite further. So that's the more accurate version. So I just want to clarify that.
Okay, thank you very much. I just asked for what was in the document to just be put up, so that when we talk about that was roughly okay, what do we mean, and do we need to, because there was a subcommittee then that came with another recommendation that seems to have gotten people kind of stuck. So I'm trying to find a way that we can continue with this discussion without getting all entangled. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think you're partly covering me, but I wanted to respond to what Mr. Ali said. On the
Now I've been promoted now.
yeah, actually we didn't want the promotion. On on the second point, one of the reasons why in the discussion the students had, when we decided to go back to the initial terms of reference, was mostly very much influenced by also the second part in the updated version. If you look, it talks about invite submissions from all constituencies and amnesties granted and make recommendation on how. No, that's the initial one. That's initial. Okay. Yeah, but in the updated one, it talks about whether the amnesties clemencies can be revoked or that, and we disagreed with that very much. Hence, we think that the first terms of reference, point number 2, deals with what we see as a commission to deal with this.
Okay. So can we? We have to have at least a discussion about this. My understanding was that this was what was contained in the agreement, and there has been invitations for the constituencies to deliberate on the terms of reference, to add, to subtract, or whatever. I'm just using this as a basis for where we start, because otherwise we start from a document that is already contested. And the reason I'm putting it out there, I'm not saying that everybody agrees. I want to perhaps say, if we look at number 1, which is looking to what is referred to as Sharkville protest of February 20, including any related, is that still standing? And if we agree, then we go to the second or whatever, and then we invite some more additions from the other constituencies that are critical for the terms of reference.
Thanks, Chair. The opening sentence is a very important sentence. It says, without limiting the terms of reference.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I actually propose is that the initial terms of reference should constitute the frame in terms of reference and the spirit of those. They shouldn't be changed or because it reflects an agreement, and notwithstanding the fact that there are many people who feel they were not part of the agreement, for good or for bad, that's the agreement that was signed and was the basis of us moving the university forward towards the end of last year. So I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding that without limiting the terms of reference almost became interpreted as changing the initial terms of reference, which was never really the intention. It was that these are the initial terms of reference. Now the only point of correction is point 2, because in the agreement itself, what was agreed to was not amnesty but clemency, and we didn't change the agreement because it was all done, to a last minute. So we didn't change the agreement before we signed the agreement. But everybody knows that amnesties were not granted, clemencies were granted, and the understanding was that the IRTC would consider whether the clemencies should be made amnesties.
Amnesty, yeah.
But there was no question about the clemencies being revoked.
Yeah.
But there was no guarantee that clemencies would become amnesties. So I think that was the spirit of the agreement.
Yeah.
So really what we are discussing now is whether these terms of reference are insufficient.
Yeah.
And are there other terms of reference that constituencies want to bring to amplify, to add to, but not to change the spirit of those initial terms of reference?
Yeah. And can I then ask Russell if because I think I was part of that meeting, so I remember very well that there were clemencies, not amnesties granted.
Yeah.
So if we change that, then that means exactly what happened that time. And then we then can look at this document and say, from the other constituencies, and I know, and I'm sorry that people may feel that they've worked very hard and now their work is not going to be important, but maybe we're opening a discussion where you could add to those But this is where we started. This is where this whole thing started. Can I have some show of hands as to how we proceed?
I just want to ask if we should consider maybe being a bit more specific where it says past 18 months, to say since the beginning of 2015 or something to that effect, just because
It's not 18 months.
people may think it excludes some events.
It was 2016.
I think there's a question on the floor as to whether the 18 months, that is, make recommendation on institutional culture, transformation, decolonization, discrimination, identity, disability, and any other matter that the university community has raised over the past 18 months or may wish to raise. And I think that was linked to when the roads must fall, you know, it was almost like going back in time to that and kind of saying that's what is being addressed. And I'm not necessarily saying the 18 months is correct. I'm just explaining how I understood it at the time. So the question is, do you stay with 18 months? Do you open it wider? I don't know. There was a hand here. Okay.
This is the third. So I'm just interested to find out, in terms of that the IRTC must make recommendations, institutional culture, particularly disabilities. There have been kind of teams that have already made recommendations. So what then happens to those recommendations that are sitting at the institution's table and they've yet to look at?
Well, my understanding actually on how, because I mean, I was part of the, not that I was a commissioner, but I worked with the previous commission. My understanding is that if there are bodies that are already, or groups of students or sections that are already dealing with aspects of this, they could make submissions to say this is what.
No, I get it.
I'm just giving you a sense of how the other commission operated, that people were bringing submissions from their different constituencies to the commission, then that will take that and include it in their work of work. I'm not necessarily saying that that's what the university will do. I'm just giving a sense of how one accommodates work that comes outside of the commission but is being done, because the commission cannot do all the work. I mean, as you say, there's already work that students are already doing. How do you then put that work within the commission structure?
So for me, what stings is the fact that I'll just particularly, let's say, I'm not too sure kind of how the progress of other task teams. The mental health task team, we've spent a year. We've consulted with policies outside of this continent. We've consulted so many people, we've made recommendations, and the fact that now it's going to be going to another group of people who are then going to maybe filter that or change that before it goes to the institution, it hurts a lot.
Okay.
And I think that's where my issue comes in, the fact that we spent a whole year, we spent Saturdays at these workshops, and it's not just students, it's staff members. We're working with Stellenbosch, we have put so much work into it, and the thought that that's going to go to someone else that may filter that out before it goes to the institution, it bothers us, and it bothers us greatly.
Okay.
So, I think Lon will speak to this, and so I may be okay. Yeah, testing her or something of the sort. So for me, it's in the same manner in which, along with the terms of reference, I would move that the alumni submission be appendixed to that, right? Because then I think it also gives a further view in terms of, because that submission one speaks to the terms of reference, and then it speaks to the visualization of this committee. So that even when the commissioners are called and they see what you're talking about, they have got a clearer sense. They're not coming to just this institution and being told, here, come and reform. What are we reforming, right? So they can see there's a particular understanding of it. As such, that submission is supported, and we'll say that it ought to be appendixed to the terms of reference and any other points that we give to the commissioners. But now going back to what Timberlake is saying, there's a lot of data which has been collected. There's a lot of work that has been collected by a variety of groups, right? Those groups are fragmented, but groups, by in and of themselves, they represent particular constituencies, which do not have airtime as Streckful does. So what I would then propose, because there are so many of these groups, and would end up having a document that has 100 terms of reference, we could then say, but at the very same point, we cannot ignore those submissions and the work that has been done. So then, as a point of reference, as a point of departure, the commissioners ought to, or must, right? We can deliberate the word between must and ought to or should. Consider or like, as a point of departure, they should start from the views of consolidate the work that has been done. I'm trying very hard to find the words, but I'm saying they should start by disability justice, start by mental health, start by Patrick Maswell, right? Because they've made a number of recommendations for many things, and those people are people, and those groups are groups that have been in the institution, so they understand the institution, and their recommendations, I think, should be given significant more weight than recommendations that come from external people that really do not know the dynamics of the institution. So it's a point of departure. The commissioners ought to start from there, right? So that we can also co-opt and bring those conversations into the fore. Because then, one thing that we do not want is for Patrick Maswell, mental health, disability justice, to just be absorbed into this big and broad process that is institutional review, right? Because then, again, they lose. Yes, right. They lose this. They don't get the space. Because then already the perception is that this process is fundamentally focused on race issues, while it is not, right? When it's institutional reform, we mean the entire four of issues. So I think it is then quite important that we depart from that particular point. That's one thing. I've got two other things to say, but I would like this to be dealt with first.
Okay. So Snowball, can I understand then that would be a recommendation that?
So I wouldn't make it a recommendation. So I would like, perhaps I should go on to my second thing, and I just want to read it off now. Just bear with me quickly. Someone need this take me go. The alumni. Not the proposed one, the alumni. No, the alumni. No, not that one.
Okay, so we'll be back.
Okay, we'll be back to it. But basically, I'll just read it off my head. In the seminar that it said I got it. In the seminar in which I said like the commissioners ought to have binding powers to call. I'm not sure whether there's a term of reference. Okay. In addition, yes, it is a term of reference. I'm reading from the alumni document, like the previous alumni document, 4.6. In addition to inviting submissions from all constituencies, the IRTC should have the authority to call upon specific individuals or structures to make submissions or appear before it, right? If we can accept that as a term of reference, I think then we can also accept that the commissioners ought to, as a point of departure, start from group X, Y, and Z.
So that's a recommendation.
This is the submissions of the.
So
alumni.
can I just get clarity from this? So we have certain policies that are where groups have been part of in terms of the drafting, and those policies are now about to go through existing university structures, such as, for example, USAC. Okay, so let's take the sexualities policy. It's about to go to the next USAC meeting. Is the recommendation that before it goes through the institutional process, that it should go to the IRTC?
No.
But should it be that once it has gone through the university process, that it should also be considered by the IRTC?
Okay. I think that's a point of clarity being sought. You guys need to just hang in there. We are going to get to understanding what you're saying. We just need some clarity. So there's a question here that I think you can answer. Okay, go ahead.
So to be honest, I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure, because for me, it's one of those. If we've had people, I mean, it's not just students, right? these task teams were established with academics and really, really great people. I don't want to call us experts, but hey. But like, you know what I mean? But like, you have people that spent a lot of time, a lot of research, and they are quite familiar in those things. What I don't want this process, particularly this line, it seems very undermining. It seems as if you have people, for example, disability, people that have worked really hard, you have experts, and then someone else is going to come and make recommendations. And my question is kind of coming as an outsider would be, what are you making these like recommendations on basis of? Like, what is your history? What have you done? When there are people who've already done so it's very tricky. I don't know if I'm saying why is it even going to the IRTC, because you have people that have worked hard and they're, or I'm saying I wanted to be honest, I don't know.
I think the point that is being made is well taken. Completely understand there's been work that has been done. It can't wait for a group of experts to decide what happens with it. You need to know how it's going to be implemented, and I think that's what you're saying, and I think that point has been taken. It's how we then frame it in the terms of reference so that it's captured, that it's not an add-on and it doesn't, but it's recognizing that it's been work that has been done, and there are hands that are up which may help us frame it. No, first of all, I think it was Deborah, and then it's...
I mean, what I heard first was that...
And then it's you.
Was that these other groups want to be heard by this group rather than that they wanted to go to the IRTC as such. So it's like the IRTC is getting a lot of airspace and live stream things, and these other groups aren't. We are giving the IRTC an absolutely enormous task to do. And my suggestion would be there are all these other processes. At the beginning, the IRTC gets top, because the idea was always we give the IRTC a broad terms of reference and they are going to refine it before they go ahead. As part of that briefing, we give them the broad thing and we say there are 6 other processes that are ongoing or nearly finished or just starting. When you draft your terms of reference, bear those in mind and don't duplicate work, because those are experts. Or if people are unhappy with some of those processes, they can come and tell the IRTC. But don't take work that has been done over a year by a specialized committee and give it to the IRTC that is not specialized in that to decide on. What I was hearing is, why is council or whoever makes the decisions not taking these other processes so seriously? I wasn't hearing everything must go to the IRTC because the IRTC is going to be overwhelmed.
Mr. Max?
I think mine is a very minor adaptation, which is to say that where I think there might be some frustration, that everything that is currently underway should continue and there should be no pauses because of the IRTC. So the mental health task team report is coming to us, we must respond, etc. As if there wasn't going to be an IRTC. We should just proceed as fast as possible. But I would expect that there will be areas where we don't necessarily have agreement. So I know, for example, around disability, that there are expectations about what the university should provide to create equal access for disabled students, which I don't think we can provide. And I think what we do is consistent with the law in terms of reasonable accommodation, and there are limits. Now, so there's going to be areas where we disagree, and that I think could be useful for the IRTC to say, here's the report of the task team. Here's the executive's response of what we're going to do about this. And this neutral body, who we all respect, would say, this is reasonable, or the university is behaving inequitably and actually has to do more, or we understand, or this is an area where we're going to remain with disagreements and vested interests, but at least it's been aired and it's been commented on. It's not just like a task team shouting into the wind and the executive ignoring them or things. So there's creates a kind of accountability process that if the task team is going to make a set of recommendations, they are not just to the executive, they get another area. So because of that, I don't think we should write out of the terms of reference that the IRTC mustn't consider this because it's been dealt with elsewhere, but that the way they consider those issues would be different. They would receive a report from an expert group, they would invite maybe the university or others to respond, and they would make maybe comment if they think it's appropriate, and if they don't, they wouldn't.
Thank you, Mr. Max. There was a hand here, and then I'll go to you, and then I'll go back to Snottle.
I think I agree with both Debbie and Max. And I just want to add on, the difference in the recommendations, in my mind, is that the task teams are focused on very specific areas or subject areas. And so what they're working with and what they'll recommend is quite specific. The IRTC is giving a much broader picture of things. It wouldn't get down, I think, to the depth and detail that you would get down to, say, for example, in looking at the mental health issues on campus. But it would be very important for the IRTC to, if it's relevant, be making a comment around mental health things, and they cannot do that if they don't hear what's happening in a task team that's currently operational on campus. So it is, to me, that's the connection. And it would be terrible if the IRTC just ignored that such a process or any other similar was underway. So I think it is just about making sure, and so I think the clause that Sino was quoting was from our last steering committee meeting, and we'd agreed that that was something we wanted to work with, the idea of that they could invite people. So I think we need to, I don't have that word, but he's got it there, that maybe that is what you've got it there, Nicola. So perhaps that's what we need to agree. I just want to second his proposal, that we do agree that to that wording, and perhaps mention the specific task teams.
So the suggestion is that it goes into the terms of reference as an addition.
Yeah, and as an example, and we could say, in particular, these task teams or something of the sort.
Can you please read?
Okay, she's
Can we read that? Do you have it?
No.
Okay. Can we listen to the reading then of the clause that is being talked about?
So it's a part of the revisions that happened, I think, subsequent to this, was to try and operationalize some of these points that were in the earlier terms of reference. So at point 3, it says everything about making recommendations, but there's nothing about inviting submissions.
Okay.
And so if you look at some stage, we talk about cluster 1 and cluster 2. So we had breaking that up into 2 sections.
Okay.
And the first section is to invite all constituencies, and then in response to the alumni document, we added and be able to request relevant individuals and structures. We could say there may be including task teams. And I can read this slowly just now. To make submissions on institutional culture and practices, including decolonization, and any that entail unjust discrimination, domination, and then also in subsequence to the next alumni document that's already been tabled, I thought we could add, or violence, including sexual violence, because I think that's something that comes up very strongly in that last document. So that's inviting submissions, and then we could have a second point, which is to make the recommendations. So I don't know if you want me to read that slowly and type it up?
Yes, please.
You're not.
Sorry?
Can you please read that?
Okay. So can we, Shamaine,
Okay.
are you typing?
Yes, if we were going to cut and paste from previous documents, is that the suggestion?
Can I email it to you now?
No, we're wording it.
Okay.
Or I can read it to you.
I thought maybe, because I could get those previous documents, but
No, it's slower. So just, you can type. So invite all constituencies. Comma, and be able to request relevant individuals. And individuals and structures. And we could say they're including task teams. Okay, then to make submissions. on institutional culture and practices, comma, including decolonization and any that entail unjust discrimination, domination or violence, including sexual violence, in brackets. And then there's the next point would be to make recommendations. Make recommendations on how the university might progress with respect to transformation, decolonization, and creating an environment of respect and tolerance.
Ooh, I'm so already.
No. So listen, that's what we, and that was came out once again in the alumni document that spoke to respect and tolerance.
Yeah. Okay, can I just say that this was of course, Snopolo, you might have to help us because this was linked to your point that there was something within the alumni document that captured. Now we've put everything up that was seemed to be linked to the point you were talking to. So you tell us which one needs to be cut out so that we can just concentrate on what needs to come in. I understand the problem with the wording, but if that is, there's point 4, invite all constituencies and be able to request the relevant. Is that what you are talking about? Do these capture what you guys are trying to say is?
The thing is this, right? Like, there's a bit of a disrespect here, okay? I mean,
disrespect?
Yes, and I'll qualify that now. So, I'm part from this group, right? That's been working on these particular things for the longest of time. I've submitted, it's going out through USEC and stuff. And you're telling me that I now need to resubmit the same thing to the IRTC, right? I mean, it's already going through a university process, like, you know, to the next level, and tell them like to resubmit it again. I guess the point I was making is in terms of, when I agree with what Dr. Prazi said earlier on, right? So like, you're departing from that. So it's rather like, let's say invite or perhaps change the word into you are considering. So I mean that already. So let's say you said that the mental health report is already going through to USEC, right? Okay, the sexuality report is already going through to USEC. The question then for me is, how do you put weight of that particular recommendation as any other recommendation that will come out from the IRTC process? Because you could have Power Camas Wall having collected all this data to make that particular report to USEC, and USEC will say, out of the 10 points that we've submitted, we'll take 1 to 3, we're not sure about 5, 6 is too costly, 8 and 9 we're discussing all together, right? And then you've got the IRTC process that is recommending a recommendation X. It says that paint the entire school pink, right? Everyone will take it seriously because it comes from the IRTC. So how do you then bring up on par the same report which is going through USEC and the same which will come out from the IRTC? For me, that is the fundamental question.
Yeah, it is.
So my suggestion then is to invite all is a bit problematic. So how do I phrase this to be?
Can I?
Yeah.
Consider.
Inform itself on all existing.
Yes, perhaps. Yeah.
So before invite all constituencies, inform itself on all existing or past and ongoing initiatives, which is broad enough to address issues related to the IRTC scope.
Yes.
And then they invite submissions. If everybody loves the new sexual whatever policy, then people won't submit, or they'll say we love it. If they think there's a problem, they can submit, but it's not reconsidered unless somebody has a complaint.
Yes. Yeah, let's try that.
Does that cover what you're trying to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's just try it inside without.
Debbie was informed. It was supposed to
inform itself
on all the existing,
on all recent and ongoing initiatives to address the issues that fall within the scope of the broad scope of the IRTC. I mean, yeah.
How's that?
May I come to your rescue, Chair?
Yes.
To make?
Somebody. Okay. Sorry. He's had his.
Yes. Chair, I think this also comes into the importance of, it's outside of the terms of reference, but the idea that the university will host wide meetings, blah, 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 seminars and all that. If we can put that as not the university, but the commissioners, right? So it forms part of informing itself of initiatives that have happened. So there must be a time frame that is given to commissioners before the actual work starts.
Yeah.
They go on and inform themselves of all these initiatives that have happened, whether it's task teams or this just jail constituencies that we have not considered. And also, I do think also in the terms of reference, because I don't think it's enough to just inform itself, because it might inform itself of certain things, but they're not covered well within the terms of reference that they cannot do anything about. So they may find that there's a particular problem that they found when they're looking at all these submissions have been made before. But the terms of reference that we have considered, do not allow them to deal with that. So they see a problem, but they're not given the scope to deal with that. So I was suggesting that after informing itself, we should have a line that says that the commissioners, after that whole getting in touch with the university community, should come back to the steering committee if they see that there are certain things that we have not looked at in the terms of reference, and suggest that it is added in the terms of reference of their work. It will still be up to the committee to approve or not approve of that, but we should allow scope for the commissioners to be able to see things that we in this room might not be able to see, because we know that there are certain people that are not going to be outright to come and submit. So if you can allow for that as well, that they're able to, if they see that there's a certain thing that needs to be dealt with, but it is not within the terms of reference, they come back and then we approve, and then it becomes part of the terms of reference.
Okay, sure. That's a suggestion. Can I?
Chair, may I just amplify what Linda just said now? I think as the TRC, as the steering committee, I think we should be modest enough to admit that there was life before us. I think that's the problem here. We don't have to have an exhaustive list of terms of reference. We don't have to have that. There was life before us. I don't know what would have happened to those reports if there was not this process. Those reports that have been submitted must see their life through. What should have happened to them must actually happen. But I think we need to be very clear that there are other reports that were submitted by this university. The commissioners must be cognizant of that reality. But I'm not sure whether it's helpful to actually have a long list of terms of reference, because a lot of issues will be lost in that. I think we should find a way of bringing to the attention of commissioners all the work that has been done by all these other task teams that people are referring to. But I don't think we should add more words, more sentences. The practical thing to do for us, either in the form of a preamble or in the form of a blurb, I don't know, just inform them that there's a lot of work that's been done, but I don't think we should have a long list in this here. I'm worried about that, Chair.
Simon, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be brief just to echo the last speaker's sentiments.
Yeah.
As it said initially, that when you consulted students, there was an understanding that the initial terms of reference were fine. It was just an issue of saying all of the issues, the discussion points that we've had for the last 10 minutes or so must be fed into the steering committee's work. And in particular, the issue of recommendations and existing reports that when those recommendations are made by whatever task team, that they should have a measure of weighting similar to what the recommendations of the IRTC are going to receive. That was the simple point being made.
Yeah. And I think that point seems to be getting lost. I think what I'm hearing is that there are other structures that are already doing work, and there's a fear that everybody is concentrating on this structure and this IRCT, and this is going to see the light of the day, and everything else is going to be forgotten. And I think there is a call for, my problem is that, not necessarily a problem, is how do we make sure we frame it in here so that none of that gets forgotten. So we need to be creative around the terms of reference so that when the commissioners do pick up certain points, they could also be rubber stamping and saying this needs to happen. But it doesn't preclude the problem that the students have highlighted, which is there are other structures that seem as if they are not important. We haven't talked about how those structures are going to be elevated and made to feel important, that the work that they're doing is justifiable and it's important.
Thank you, Chair. I've been sitting here and listening to this conversation, and I suppose I'm grateful to Lisa introducing this challenge, because for me this was at the root when I read the initial agreement. And I'll be frank, the lack of institutional knowledge in crafting some of the things that have happened. And then Lorna has just mentioned something for me which is very concerning around the role of these commissioners, of this process in trying to make recommendations. And she mentioned something around getting to the level of detail, right? So we know that we have task teams that are very specific, their scope is very specific to particular issues. And rightly so, they've made recommendations, actual policy recommendations, for things to change within the institution. So I suppose for me, this brings me back to me questioning the scope of this particular process, and the management of the expectations that we have of this process, because I'm looking at the balance of the terms of reference, the division between cluster 1 and cluster 2. Obviously a great deal of why we're here is because of the Sharpeville protests and the subsequent things that, clemencies, etc. And I think that the focus, and particularly when people were advocating for this process, the focus was truly on that part. And we are now seeing that, institutional culture, whatever, it's all culminated into one thing when it's actually quite complex. And I suppose my question for the people in this room is somewhat of a deep interrogation of, the kind of resource constraints we're putting on this process, the time constraints, and maybe because I'm tend to be pragmatic, God forbid this commission recommends a review of a policy, right? Because then we're going to be entering another year of review of a policy. And the fact of the matter is that this whole process is going to culminate into a report, and Sino's busy making reference to that, it will go to a committee, they'll say 1 is feasible, 2 is not feasible, 3 is a bit, has cost constraints or whatever. So I don't think that there should be an expectation that everything that the commission says is going to be, the new Bible of the University of Cape Town. So I suppose for me, my greatest frustration is the kind of burden that we are placing on this process, the kind of expectations we have of this process, and the severe implications it has on the lives of students, of staff, people who have come and gone from this institution. As somebody who has also been quite involved in the activism of this university since, Rhodes Must Fall days, it's frustrating to sit here and to hear that things that were brought up in 2015 are still going to be subject to a whole commission and a report and probably subsequent reviews. And I don't know if we're being creative enough, and I know that what I'm saying is also a demanding statement on other people in terms of responding to practical, pragmatic ways of resolution. But I did want to echo, or at least register, a deep concern that I have that the real issues of our university are not getting enough focus. Apart from the existing processes that are taking place, right? This is a two-pronged process for me that's still not going to lead to much. If you're going to be telling me that they're going to make general recommendations that will probably lead to another institutional process. So I don't know what I have a question about. Should we include this? Should we have a parallel process that's happening that can devote more time? Does this actually deserve a lot more thought than we're giving it? Because I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced by having this as a second process handled by the same people with the resources that it has, given the complexity of the problems. And I think that is a huge feeling amongst students from across the board, from different constituencies, that are feeling as though this is not an adequate response to the gravity of the challenges that we're facing.
Thanks, Rorisan. I think the reality of questions of expectation and the wideness of the terms of reference is a reality that has to be confronted, because you don't also want to give commissioners a huge terms of reference that they can't even deal with because it's just so huge, and then you give them, I don't know how many days this is going to be. So I think we may have to be humble in our articulation of what the Commission can do in the first instance, so that we're not asking too much of a body that cannot actually deliver on everything. I'm just saying that as a statement from what I'm hearing. And I think that's a reality, and we shouldn't overlook that, because it makes sense to pay attention to these things. It was your turn and then your turn.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, these things always make sense from particular, like if you just ground it down to context or like logical things. So for instance, this IRTC, all of this is being paid for by the University of Cape Town, right? So UCT has got a particular incentive to be engaged in an IRTC process. So like UCT, for instance, once the disco harassment policy came out, that wasn't put on the UCT website as like a leading article in comparison to the weekly announcement. So after this steering committee meeting, by Monday you're going to get a campus announcement from the chair of council reporting back on what has happened, etc. You don't get the same thing for the outcomes of the curriculum change working group, as an example. That's just, so it makes sense to understand. So if it's a question of expectations, people must not be naive in thinking of why we are here. There are particular incentives and motives that people have for pushing these processes, and that's what informs our expectations, right? So that is why this idea of how much weighting and the importance this particular commission is being given fits into the question of asking what are the expectations. Because people don't just devote their time and resources in something if they aren't expecting a particular outcome. And we must be honest in asking the people in this group why they're investing their time and their resources for those particular outcomes. And so as an example, the executive might say, we're investing our time and the university resources and giving you all of this airtime so that if certain recommendations come from the commissioners, for example, how to deal with protests, that can justify certain actions taken when protests do happen, because we can say, look, we're at this wide consultative process which is legitimized by the university, so therefore subsequent actions from that are justified. Let's say they happen to be very repressive responses to protests, right? So that may be one expectation as an example. But so that must be understood in terms of what the expectations are. And it's only fair that students who've been marginalized and who feel that when they engage with other initiatives and aren't given this kind of limelight to showcase what their activities are, it's only fair to expect that we can impose expectations, even if they're heavy expectations. It's only fair that those expectations be imposed on the steering committee because of the central of the kind of spotlight that it has attracted, and that UCT has specifically chosen to garner and push resources towards advancing the spotlight. If you followed the same process for any other committee, if you live streamed all of the disco review meetings, all of the mental health meetings, the disability meetings, we wouldn't having this problem. So it is exactly fair, from my view, to impose these expectations. And if the university can make something like this work, it can surely make all of the other expectations and all of the other issues being brought forth by the students, it can make it filter into this process. There's no reason why it can be constrained.
I think I'm getting the point that you made, King Simon, but I'm struggling because we're talking about terms of reference for the commission, and there is a request for the university to pay attention to other processes that are going and give them as much value. Now, I'm not sure how one captures that within the terms of reference of a body that is designed to do something different from the others. So please help me understand, because if this conversation is parallel and you need to have the conversation around the importance of the other structures and ask the administration to pay.
I got it.
You got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So instead of saying, I think when you say like bringing weight, right?
Yeah.
Inform yourself and give. So inform, like there we are, right? Inform yourself on all recent
and ongoing initiatives.
Yeah. So inform yourself on ongoing initiatives, right? So I'll say give due consideration to ongoing recent initiatives. Okay. Wait, let me write it down, then I'll come back to you. Let me just write it down. Let's have it.
Okay.
May I have a submission on the third point? Make recommendation on institutional culture, transformation, decolonization, discrimination, identity, disability. Comma, I also think that must add labor there. Labor relations.
So workers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what to do.
So that's fair. I haven't said anything on workers.
I'm captured.
Okay. Is that agreeable?
There we are. So we've agreed that we can take 3 and divide it into 4, 5, and 6 is basically a revision of 3.
No, my thing is just a revision because you see.
No, but I'm saying, but 3, we've split 3 into 4, 5, and 6. And so if you want to add labour, then you need to make it 2.5, don't you? Not 2.3.
No. I don't necessarily think so. Because if you look at, like, because also there's no other, it talks about institutional culture, decolonization. You don't have another point that speaks directly to decolonization. 6, where does 6 say?
5 and 6 something, but 5.
You see, the proposal was that 3 should be elaborated into 5
Oh.
and 6, then replace 3.
We can edit as another point if you want, but I just wanted, like, that's something part of the terms of reference that the commission must look into. If you want to edit as a separate point, we can.
Relations.
Yeah.
Okay, can we come back to that? Can you just highlight that part about labor relations as to whether it can? And Rory-san, and then you had your hand up.
Chair, I think the challenge with trying to engage caucus positions is that people often speak past each other. I don't think that there's been adequate engagement, again, on the scope of this process. People are adding things here, adding responsibilities, but no one is actually engaged on the scope of these responsibilities and whether that's an actual expectation that is fair on this process. So while it's great for us to be engaged, and I think it's also massively frustrating to be trying to resolve this issue when the very same students that were involved in, trying in crafting this document are now trying to say, let's engage on the issue. Do we think that our expectations of this process, the way it stands right now, because we're writing these terms of reference, and do we think that at the end of the day, we'll be able to fulfill this or not? Or should we be thinking, along with this terms of reference, is this the appropriate structure? I haven't had any engagement on that point. And the reason I'm pushing this is because people are adding things like labor relations, which I cannot contest and I completely agree with. But I'm still like, this sounds wonderful on paper, but what does it actually mean practically? And is this the space to be discussing it? And that's a fair point to be asking. And if people feel that it's an inappropriate discussion to be having, that's fine. But I would just like an indication on that, please.
Thank you, Rorisang. It was your turn.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to follow up on the point that was made earlier, that there's attention to the shackle protest probably at the expense of other matters. And my response to that was whether the point, the first bullet, whether that doesn't address other related matters as it's put out. My sense is that, after the comment got including any related and subsequent protest actions, and I think with that, it probably covers matters that are outside of the Shackville protests. And I don't think it would be necessary to articulate all specific matters, but I think that it covers matters that are outside of the Shackville protests.
Yeah,
that's my view.
Max?
Chair, on the last point, I would disagree with Nombulelo. I think that what the first clause refers to is protests. So it's referring to the protests and the subsequent protests. And it's also the protests that started in February 16 with Shackville and the subsequent protests that mainly occurred in September and October. Many of the issues that are being referred to in the subsequent clauses were preceded Shackville. They're from Roads Must Fall, and they're the mental health issues, the disability issues, the gender issues, sexual assault issues, and they may have at some point been caught up, but I think the point is that they were more examples of the institutional culture. And so in the clause that makes reference to institutional culture, it also makes reference to these, including decolonization, discrimination, violence, etc. So I think it is important to list it. I think we should just get clarity if we've agreed that clause 3 has been replaced by 4, 5, and 6, because at the moment we're editing them both. I think the intention was 4, 5, and 6 would replace 3 in order to make it more explicit, and if we're happy with that, we can take it out. And then we should just make sure that then we have the discussion about labor relations. I also worry that we, by making explicit that they have to address labor relations, it's a very big field. And you could have a commission devoted to that. But it can be there, and we can leave it to the commissioners to decide on the depth, as we are going to have to leave it to them to decide on the depth of all the other issues. It's listing the kinds of issues that contribute to the institutional culture, I think. And so then that labour relations would come into one of the other clauses, 4, 5, and 6. There is a clause that, in the way that the agreement was laid out, you selected from our original agreement sections B1, 2, and 3, because that's what it referred to as what the commissioners would address. But in the agreement, there was another section when it's not clear that it's covered. I think it should be made explicit. It was on page 2 of the agreement, section C, and it referred to a moratorium on disciplinary tribunals relating to the list of cases pending, pending the recommendations of the IRTC, TRC, on acceptable forms of protest and appropriate disciplinary process and sanctions on the university. It said the IRTC, Shackville TRC, will make recommendations on how to deal with each outstanding case in the spirit of restorative justice. Now, you could argue that that is already covered in Roman numeral 1. Look into what is referred to as shackful protests, including any related and subsequent protest actions. But the fact that we have Roman numeral 2, which makes specific reference to the clemencies and the need for the IRTC to address the clemencies and amnesties, I think we should also have a Roman numeral 3 then that relates to this clause, that the referring of the list of cases pending to be considered by the IRTC. Does everyone, do you have that? It's yeah, you've got it on the screen there.
So you're suggesting that that comes.
Now, not the whole paragraph, but the whole paragraph isn't quite relevant. But it may be. It may be the last sentence of that paragraph.
Yeah, that RCT Shackle TRC will make recommendations on how to deal with each outstanding
But it'll
case
have to
in
make
the
reference to
spirit-
what those cases are. There's a list of cases.
The list of cases
Oh,
in the
just-
spirit of restorative justice.
Okay, see, that must be added in.
Can I?
That's
can
what I'm
I,
saying. It should be added as another, as a.
Can I say we've gone past 3, but can I just say that it's important that we put stuff out and we can take it out if it doesn't resonate with people. But it's important that we hear each other. So Max, what you're suggesting is that it's not down there. It's following number 2.
Well, it has to be incorporated into the terms of reference because we can't ask the commissioners to go and extract bits and pieces from the agreement. So I would make it Roman numeral 3 because it should come after the clemencies.
Okay.
The clemencies
It's an addition
relates.
that we're not saying that it's in. We're just saying that it needs to be discussed as to whether that.
Well, I think in
becomes part
terms of the agreement it is in.
Yeah.
It is in terms of the agreement. It's just we want to pull it into one place so that
Yeah.
the terms of reference are clear.
So can I, again, I do want to, because I think it's important that we also are mindful of what this commission can possibly do in the time that it's given. I think maybe we should put stuff out there and say this is what the terms of references are, but we do need to cross the reference as to whether the terms of reference and the time given is going to be adequate, because otherwise you're asking people to do something that is a job that is too big. I know you're unhappy about that, but that's...
No,
No, I'm not saying... You seem unhappy about that
Lisa,
statement.
I just think...
I mean, we can't...
Particularly for the second part, I think I'm with Simon on this, the fact that I don't feel bad, because this is the situation that this institution has found itself in, and it needs to be sorted out. So, and if that means more university resources, I'm so unempathetic in this case, because like the situation is this bad, and for me it's not fair that we have, for example, one whole section on just like the politics and the racial stuff that happened, which is obviously very important. Like these are my comms, right? And then we're going to now start talking about, let's not give them too much, like the timeline for labor relations, the timeline for all these other things. I don't feel it's fair. And I think that's where for me, like,
That wasn't the point that was being made. I wasn't making that point. The point I'm making is we need to put everything up that people feel needs to be discussed as terms of reference.
Yes.
But that needs to take cognizance of the time that it will take for all of those. And I'm not necessarily saying that it will be that the university will not be able to do all of that. All of this is important, of course. But it's also about the commissioners, because when the commissioners are appointed, they will be able to look at the terms of reference and say, for this amount of time and this space, these are, because we may then need to prioritize as to what are the things that have to be done immediately and what are the things that, you know.
Respectfully, Chair,
Yeah.
I feel like you are expressing your opinion, which is
okay. Sorry.
As you should be facilitating us expressing ours.
Sure.
And you also don't always see everybody's hands.
Oh, sorry.
So I would just like to ask if we can maybe have a 5 minutes quick pause, because we're suggesting a lot of stuff so that we can actually look at what is up there to assist us in getting to a tight conclusion.
Sure.
So that we can just have a moment to kind of see, taking into account the last contributions also of Dr. Prashamani is all there? Yeah. So that we can look at it and then see what do we agree with, what changes do we still want to make.
Okay.
Before we have the caucus. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I second Lena's suggestion. In reference to the Vice Chancellor proposal, that point was discussed in length in the previous steering committee meeting. This issue of what acceptable forms of protest are. It was deliberated on extensively, and we decided not to include that. That is going to be, if you want to, for this process to stop, like right now, it's going to stop now, because there was extensive discussion, and it was agreed. Again, was why we said at the beginning that people are fine with the initial terms of reference, and it was decided upon that is not going to be formed part of the terms of reference, and it has been discussed extensively.
Which point is Simon speaking on?
He's speaking on point number 3 that has been added by VC Max, which comes from this document.
My understanding I don't know, maybe I'm capturing you wrong, because my understanding was that we disagreed, in the last meeting we disagreed with setting out issues of acceptable and unacceptable forms of protest.
Yeah.
I don't know how that deals with that.
What do you mean?
Like how is that speaking on that point? Does that point speak on forms of protest?
Yeah. Oh. Is that on the left side?
Chair?
Can I please ask then? Are we saying that point number 3 comes out of the? Is that?
Chair, can we just have the 5 minutes, please?
The 5
so
minutes
that we can all kind of gather our brains together and then come back.
I second that.
Second it. With amendment. Can the secretary please just quickly email the second part, because this is something that we're working with as we go, right, in the caucus. Can that just be quickly emailed to everyone of this seating? Is it possible? Yeah. So it was like, yeah, so people can just go and refresh their brains or something. Yeah.
Okay, so 5-minute break. Up until 4:15.
Let's just see if we're on 2 pages or 1 page here. What? I'm making